You make how much? I heard him say through the half-open door like it was a punchline. Jasper Kent. Voice like a TED Talk, spine like a stick of gum. He was showing my salary breakdown to the CFO like he'd caught me embezzling gold bars from the Vatican. No context, no trailing metrics, just raw numbers and that condescending smirk. That's more than some VPs. For spreadsheets? I closed the door behind me like I hadn't heard a damn thing, but something in my chest tightened, sharp and low. I'd spent 9 years at Denmore Capital, 9 years building risk models so tight the SEC once asked if we had an oracle on payroll. I wasn't loud about it. I didn't need to be. My dashboards were the reason 2 separate audits cleared in under a week. My models had saved the firm's largest hedge client from a derivatives sinkhole in 2020. But no one talks about the architect when the building doesn't fall. If you've made it this far, I hope you'll consider liking the video and subscribing. 97% of people listen without hitting that button, and it really keeps this kind of storytelling alive. It helps more than you know. Thanks. Back when I first joined, the office was a different beast. The founders still walked the floor. Deals were handwritten before they hit Salesforce, and I was hired not because I knew how to code, but because I knew why things broke. Every change I made in the system had a logic trail, a justification, a fallback. I didn't just plug in equations, I built systems that breathed. But time passed, culture shifted. The old guard retired, sold off, or got pushed into consulting. What came in was sleeker, hungrier, more PowerPoint. Jasper was the latest upgrade, a Harvard MBA with a jawline you could cut glass on and a portfolio full of buzzwords. The CEO, his uncle, introduced him at our quarterly all-hands as a mind built for tomorrow's challenges. Tomorrow apparently didn't involve understanding how today even functioned. He didn't speak in specifics, just suggestions. Let's align better with revenue outcomes. Let's optimize back-end dependencies. Vague enough to sound smart, safe enough to not commit. But I saw the data he was pulling. Internal comp reports, usage stats, redlined bonuses. My title, Lead Finance Ops Architect, wasn't flashy, but my name sat atop half the scripts that ran the firm's compliance ecosystem. And my salary? It reflected the fact that if I walked, 6 departments would freeze within the hour. Still, Jasper kept circling. He'd stop by my desk with questions that felt innocent until they weren't. Do you still maintain that old derivatives tracker, or has someone else picked that up? Translation? Can we say you're redundant? How automated is your client churn risk model these days? Translation. Can we offload your function to a cheaper analyst? I kept my answers clean. Short. I never gave him rope. But I documented everything. His questions, his phrasing, the spreadsheets I saw open when I passed his office. I even saved a draft email he never sent but previewed in Outlook's side pane. Legacy comp models and termination considerations. CJWU PDF. That's me. Claire J. Wren. He thought I was just a number, one he could slash and present as a quick win in his next slide deck. But what Jasper Kent never understood, what none of them understood, is that numbers don't just sit in cells. They ripple. They connect to systems, contracts, functions, consequences. And in my case, the consequence of removing me wasn't just operational. It was contractual, and it was already signed. Jasper started lurking around finance like a possum sniffing for dropped fries. He wasn't even subtle about it, just popped in with that boy wonder energy and started asking around. One of my leads, Tanya, mentioned he'd pulled 6 months of back-end usage logs, some of which had nothing to do with our active functions and everything to do with how often legacy scripts were accessed. I knew exactly where that was headed. 2 days later, our systems lead pinged me. Hey, did you know Kent requested a list of overlapping job functions across Ops teams? I did now. Add that to the salary report I saw printed and folded in his briefcase, and it painted the kind of picture consultants love. Overlap, redundancy, optimization opportunities. He wanted to look like a hero trimming the fat. Never mind the fat kept the damn place from hemorrhaging. A VP in revenue whispered to me over coffee, "He's flagged you." His tone had the weight of someone who didn't want to say it. Called your function outdated, said you were overcompensated for maintenance. Maintenance. That was the word that stuck like something rotting in my throat. I walked straight into Jasper's office, didn't knock, didn't wait. You're running a comp optimization review, I said. Fine. But if you're going to throw around phrases like legacy function, we should talk specifics. He leaned back like a smug game show host. Claire, this isn't personal. The firm's just evolving. We're trying to keep pace with the industry, and part of that means reevaluating cost structures that don't scale anymore. Cost structures, I repeated. Funny way of describing operational stability. We think the firm's outgrown some of those older roles, he said, tapping his Mont Blanc pen on the table like punctuation marks. You've done great work, but we need leaner agility now. Just make sure legal signs off before you touch anything in my comp package, I said. He chuckled. They will. It's boilerplate, right? I let him have the last word. Let him sit in his little puddle of self-assurance, floating like a duck and paddling like hell underneath. Because here's the thing. My contract wasn't boilerplate. Not even close. When Denmore acquired Pinnacle Analytics in 2017, I came over as a part of the executive clause transition package. I remember the negotiation like it happened yesterday. The clause was buried halfway through an appendix, wrapped in corporatese, and signed off under urgency before the acquisition deadline. It was called Clause 4.9C, and on paper it looked like a formality. In reality, it was a loaded gun with a hair trigger. It didn't matter whether I quit or got canned. If my role was terminated, voluntarily or otherwise, without a formal 90-day transition and legal sign-off, it unlocked a buyout cascade tied to all the equity, options, and deferred comp they'd used to sweeten the deal back then. Indexed, compounding, and timed to the firm's current valuation. He didn't know that. He was playing checkers in a minefield. What made it worse was that I'd given him a chance. A subtle warning. The way I said it, make sure legal signs off. It wasn't a threat. It was a parachute. But people like Jasper don't hear quiet warnings. They only listen to explosions. The room was warm with artificial cheer, the kind that clings to quarterly meetings like bad cologne, coffee carts, recycled pastries, and the CFO cracking some limp joke about making Q3 our Q favorite. I sat in my usual seat, 2 notches down from the CEO, across from legal. Same seat I'd held for 9 years, same view of the projector, same pretense of team spirit. Then Kent stood, clicker in hand, hair perfectly tousled like he'd just come off a photo shoot for Forbes Under 40 who don't blink enough. He launched into a presentation with all the finesse of a guy who learned business strategy from YouTube ads. We're repositioning legacy resources to better align with high-velocity outcomes, he began, like that meant anything to anyone with a working cerebrum. The slide behind him said it all. Phase 2, Analytics Optimization. Merge compliance, forecasting with market risk ops. Absorb client metrics into RevGen tools. Sunset finance ops. Architect role, estimated annual savings $312,000, and then he looked right at me, locked eyes like a magician about to pull a rabbit out of someone else's career. No offense, of course. That's when I stood. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I reached into my tote, pulled out a sealed manila envelope, my resignation, and set it gently in front of the COO. Then I took off my badge, laid it on top, and pushed both forward like a final move on a chessboard no one realized they'd been playing. Effective immediately, I said, my voice clear, calm, and as final as a gavel. For a moment, no one moved. The general counsel's head whipped toward me like she'd been hit with a taser. Her mouth opened slightly, eyes darting to the envelope, then to Kent, then back to me. She knew. Oh, she knew. Kent blinked like someone had just spoken to him in Morse code. Wait, Claire, let's not be dramatic. I didn't respond. I was already sliding my chair back. The sound of it scraping tile was louder than anything he had to say. The COO looked pale, like genuinely pale. He leaned forward, picked up the envelope with 2 fingers like it might explode, and opened it. His face drained by the time he reached the second page. That page contained the clause. The exact language, the trigger condition, the effective date, and a formal notice of counsel representation with a timestamp from 7:42 that morning. Kent tried to laugh it off. We were going to discuss this later. There's no need to walk out mid-meeting. But legal wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at the envelope. The COO had stopped reading and was already texting someone. And the general counsel? Her voice was a whisper, but I caught it as I turned to leave. Oh God, it's real. That's the thing about people like Kent. They build their careers assuming no one's smart unless they went to the same school. They don't read the fine print because they think fine print is for secretaries and paralegals. They think silence is weakness, that resignation means surrender. But what I gave them that day wasn't surrender. It was detonation. They just hadn't heard the blast yet. I walked out of that boardroom without a single glance back. No exit memo, no transition plan doc in the shared folder, no cheery goodbye email with too many exclamation points. Just me, my bag, and a quiet door clicking shut behind the dumbest strategic pivot Denmore Capital had ever made. By 1:47 p.m., legal had called an emergency sync. I wasn't there, obviously, but I'd seen enough fire drills in that building to know the choreography. The general counsel would have flipped to page 6 of my personnel file. Section, Executive Retention Provisions, subsection, Acquisition Transfers. Then she would have scrolled past the usual equity grants and base pay until she hit it. Clause 4.9c. One paragraph, 4 lines, written like an afterthought, except it wasn't. Termination, voluntary or involuntary, of lead architect without 90-day offset or formal buyout approval shall trigger a pro rata liquidation clause tied to restricted equities, vesting derivatives, and alignment bonuses defined by Appendix D of the 2017 Transition Agreement. In English, if they removed me for any reason, without either keeping me on payroll for 90 days or executing a formal buyout, I could demand a cash payout equal to the adjusted value of all deferred comp plus bonus multipliers and share acceleration, benchmarked to current fiscal valuations. Total liability, $18.4 million. Jasper, of course, called it absurd the second he heard the number. It's a technicality, he said, pacing in the war room with his suit jacket off and his voice higher than usual. She resigned. She wasn't terminated. But legal knew better. They had copies of the deck, the slide that said my position was being sunset. The phrase, role absorption, was underlined in red during the meeting. There was a recording. The termination was on record before I even stood up. And here's the real kicker, because Jasper had never consulted legal prior to presenting his little reorg fantasy. He hadn't given them a chance to negotiate the buyout timeline, which meant he'd triggered the clause without safety rails. The moment I placed that envelope on the table, the clock started ticking. The CFO got dragged in around 3U. I imagine he came in smiling, thinking this was some HR kerfuffle they could settle with a week of severance and a fruit basket. That was before they showed him the exposure report. Equity comp tied to Denmore's private valuation cap? Check. Indexed stock options from 2020? Check. Legacy performance bonuses that never fully matured but were contractually linked to payout triggers? Check, check, and check. Then came the piece no one saw coming, because Jasper hadn't bothered to ask what I actually touched. Those risk models? They weren't just dashboards. They were embedded, hard-coded into Denmore's trade protocol and client reporting framework. Meaning, if I revoked my access, and I had, those tools entered unsupported status, and if legal didn't reassign ownership fast enough, it jeopardized active compliance certifications tied to 4 major accounts. That's when the CFO called the CEO. Not a meeting, not a memo. He called. And if I had to guess, it wasn't to say, great job on the new org chart. Kent didn't sleep that night. I know this because 3 different managers texted me screenshots the next morning, 2:14 a.m., 3:06, 4:42. He was still online in Slack, pinging them with questions about data dependencies, asking for internal model diagrams, requesting legacy dashboard logs. The man was neck deep in a system he never bothered to understand, and now he was scrambling to figure out what he'd detonated. First thing the next day, he stormed into finance demanding a full breakdown. Model it out, he said. Worst case scenario, what's the total exposure? They did it, in silence, because everyone knew. The clause didn't just cover salary, it covered what the contract called adjusted trailing comp, a beautiful little term that ballooned under scrutiny. It included bonus averages across 5 years, index-linked performance grants, options priced at floor value during the 2020 downturn, and equity rollovers tied to retention-based milestones. Then came the penalty interest for failure to execute a buyout within the required window. Compound that over 3 fiscal quarters, and what started as a scary number turned into something apocalyptic. One of the finance analysts told a colleague in confidence, It's not just a severance bomb, it's a portfolio event. That afternoon, the boardroom filled with spreadsheets and caffeine, and Kent tried to look like he was still in control. He kept saying things like, "We'll restructure the reserves and let's isolate the 409A variants," like the jargon would slow the bleeding. But it didn't. The deeper they went, the worse it got. I had been woven into Denmore's bones. Every core partner knew that. By day 2, the calls started. First from external counsel, wanting clarification on who was taking over oversight of their regulatory flagging models. Then from an asset manager in London, worried that his carry structure would destabilize if I wasn't retained as his model certifier. One message forwarded to me read, "Claire Wren's name is embedded in our reporting protocols. If she's not retained, our carry terms require renegotiation under the May 2021 addendum." It came from a partner who had $240 million under management. Kent didn't respond. On day 3, 2 more partner firms demanded access to internal controls documentation I had built. They couldn't reconcile monthly reports without the formula logic embedded in my dashboards. Without those models being updated, their exposure reporting was frozen. By day 4, legal had to draft a memo outlining the full scope of dependent contractual entanglements tied to the Wren architecture. That's what they were calling it now, the Wren architecture. I hadn't spoken a word. I hadn't leaked a thing. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee out of a chipped Denmore mug, while Jasper Kent melted like an ice sculpture in August. I'd always told them the system needed redundancy. Now they were learning what happens when they ignore the warning labels. The countdown started the moment I walked out. 14 business days. That was the window outlined in Clause 4.9c. Subsection B, a subclause they probably never even knew existed. From the moment my resignation hit their server timestamp, they had 2 weeks to either execute the full buyout or trigger a series of cascading defaults buried in linked contracts and performance warranties. Denmore had never missed a deadline like that in its history. But then again, Denmore had never tried to amputate its own brainstem before either. By day 2, legal had already flagged 3 client agreements that mentioned model continuity assurance, a term referring directly to the systems I designed, certified, and updated across 4 fiscal cycles. No active replacement meant they couldn't guarantee model continuity. No model continuity triggered renegotiations. And the kicker, most of those clients had quarterly lock-in clauses with renewal penalties that fell on Denmore if the client chose not to continue. On day 3, one of the hedge partners requested a private meeting, not with Jasper, with the CEO. The man had been quiet for a year and suddenly he was demanding FaceTime. He wanted to know who was managing his custom derivatives tracker, the one I'd architected to identify synthetic asset drift before the markets did. The answer, of course, was no one, because I hadn't built that thing with a team. I was the team. Day 4 was quiet, which only made Kent more anxious. He tried to get marketing to draft a press release about internal innovation pivots. They refused. He pinged legal for permission to make a clarifying statement about the buyout rumors. They told him, and I quote, "Absolutely not." Day 5. A long-term client froze a pending renewal. It was for a liquidity stress test module I'd co-authored and updated personally every Q2. The client didn't scream or threaten. They just paused. That silence said more than any demand letter ever could. I was sitting on my porch that night when my phone buzzed. LinkedIn notification. A message from a Denmore board member, one who hadn't spoken to me in years. The message was short. No pleasantries, no attempts at small talk. Is this retrievable? I stared at it for a few seconds. Then I opened my inbox, attached a PDF of the clause, highlighted in yellow, signed and dated, and forwarded it straight to my attorney with one line, "They're blinking." And I didn't reply to the board member. Because when you spend your whole career being the failsafe, the invisible backbone, the architect no one brags about but everyone leans on, you learn when to speak and when silence screams louder. I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't returning. I was waiting for the timer to hit 0. It didn't take long for word to get out. One little change on a LinkedIn headline, just a quiet update in the experience section, and the wires lit up like I'd flipped a switch on the entire financial East Coast. Claire Wren, partner, infrastructure advisory, Rothmore Strategies. No announcement, no post, just that line. Rothmore wasn't flashy. They didn't sponsor conferences or throw rooftop parties during Finance Week. What they did throw were lifelines, tailored risk architecture for hedge funds with exposure in messy markets. They specialized in what kept compliance officers up at night: DOJ scenario mapping, SEC audit shielding, and sovereign exposure simulations. They'd offered me partner because they knew exactly what I'd built at Denmore. And more importantly, they knew how badly Denmore had screwed themselves by letting me go. Day 7, Kent called. The number popped up on my phone, one of those sleek new iPhone signatures that still thought Harvard MBA belonged in a contact name. I didn't answer. He tried again. Left a voicemail that started with, "Claire, I think we got off on the wrong foot," and ended with something about collaborative solutions. I deleted it before the desperation kicked in. Then came the email, titled simply, "Quick Chat." I forwarded it to my attorney. She replied on my behalf, cold and surgical. "Please direct all communication to counsel. Ms. Wren is not available for informal discussions." Inside Denmore's walls, the panic was thick enough to taste. HR was combing through every senior contract like there were landmines buried in the footnotes, because now they knew there were. Jasper had become a ghost in the hallway. He stopped showing up to meetings in person and started dialing in from conference rooms with the camera off. And behind closed doors, the executive committee met in silence to decide how much blood they could afford to spill. They authorized a partial payout, half the buyout package, structured as contingent mitigation settlement, hoping it would buy time or satisfy optics. But it had to come from somewhere, and they didn't have a slush fund big enough, so they pulled it from the quarterly bonus pool. Every exec's incentive package took a hit. Directors got clipped, managers got nothing. Some teams received a $0 line item marked "deferral pending internal realignment." People started asking questions. I didn't blink. I didn't gloat. I didn't post inspirational quotes about knowing your worth or doors closing so others can open. I didn't need to. The door had already opened. And now I wasn't just walking through it. I was holding it for the next person Denmore tried to underestimate. They held the meeting in the West Boardroom, the big one with the custom walnut table and the blackout blinds that never quite worked. Every chair was full, CEO at the head, legal flanking both sides. The room was packed so tight with tension you could have heard a phone vibrate from the next building over. Legal went first. They didn't build to it. No long intro, no soft padding, just a slide deck and a headline in bold. Slide 1, Clause 4.9c, triggered as of 9:12 a.m., business day 1, no spin, no ambiguity. They moved to the next one. Slide 2, estimated liability, $18,336.12, subject to upward adjustment if buyout not executed by day 14. There were audible exhales, a few cleared throats. Jasper shifted in his seat. No jacket this time. Shirt wrinkled like he hadn't gone home. His tie was gone. His confidence had evaporated. Then came the killer. Slide 3. Client churn risk, active discussions. 3. Linmore Capital, Tarson Equity, Belridge Markets. 3 of Denmore's largest partners. Combined, they controlled nearly a third of the firm's managed exposure across all divisions. And now, without my models in place, without the continuity I'd baked into every quarterly cycle, they were having active discussions. Translation: they were already shopping around. The CEO looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 slides. He turned, slow and deliberate, toward Kent. "You didn't review the legacy comp structure before initiating the termination?" His voice was flat. Not angry, just final. Jasper opened his mouth like a man trying to talk his way out of a fire. It was buried in the acquisition docs. I mean, the clause wasn't. But he didn't get to finish. The general counsel cut in without looking up from her copy of the contract. "She warned you. I was in the room when she said, and I quote, 'Make sure legal signs off.' That was the warning." And then, like the universe had a flair for timing, someone's laptop pinged. A new email. Half the room glanced toward the screen where it popped up, unmuted, unfiltered. Subject: Audit Contract Confirmation. From Rothmore Strategies. To Compliance, aidenmorecapital.com. Per our discussion, we're pleased to confirm onboarding of the 2024-2026 regulatory audit and model review contract. They hadn't even noticed I'd taken it from them, not through a press release, not with a LinkedIn brag, just signed it away, clean and quiet. The silence in the room was no longer awkward. It was absolute. Jasper didn't speak again. The board didn't look at him, and the CEO simply leaned back in his chair, hands folded, and asked legal one question. What happens if we don't pay her? The answer came without hesitation. You lose more than money. A week after the board meeting, Rothmore's website updated its partners page. No announcement, no press kit. Just one new line between two established names. Claire Wren, partner, infrastructure and risk no biography. No puffed up mission statement. No photo. Just the name, like a watermark, like a signature on the blueprint no one else could read. Denmore's comms team released a memo that Friday. Buried under 3 paragraphs of vague corporate remorse was the real message. Moving forward, we are committed to deeper legacy awareness and enhanced contractual clarity. I recognize the phrasing. Legal had written it, not PR, the kind of language you use when you're trying to say, we didn't know what we signed, but we'll pretend we do now. Jasper Kent didn't appear in the next quarterly call. He wasn't fired. That would have required a spine. He was reassigned to strategic development initiatives, which was code for a corner office with no door and no authority. I heard someone moved him to internal projects, a black hole of ideas that never see daylight. He didn't try calling again. There was nothing left to say. In the days that followed, I got quiet congratulations. A few messages from people still at Denmore. Short, respectful notes. You deserved better. They never understood what you built. Wish I had read my contract the way you did. I didn't respond to most. Some things don't need echoing. At Rothmore, I kept my head down and did the work. No interviews, no celebratory champagne toasts. We closed 2 major accounts by the end of the quarter, including one firm that used to belong to Denmore. The same models they once called legacy were now branded industry leading. And me? I stayed silent. The kind of silence you earn, not retreat into. I never posted a thread, never shared a story, never gave a soundbite. I didn't need to. The clause had already spoken. The balance sheets told the rest. And in the end, the one thing Jasper Kent never understood, what Denmore never truly grasped, was that real leverage doesn't look like shouting in a boardroom or grandstanding in a meeting. It looks like leaving quietly and taking the architecture with you.